guys, welcome to another episode. On this episode, I want to talk about the jet interview. So first and foremost, I want to congratulate everyone who made it to the next stage. By now, you probably have heard whether or not you passed the application process, and now you're about to begin, or maybe even some of you have already finished, the interview portion of the jet application. So I just want to talk about my experience with the interview process, basically how I was feeling, what was going on, what to expect, some questions, etc. Just basically give you a rundown. So let's start from the beginning. I remember that as soon as I passed, other than jumping up and down like a crazy animal, right? I got an email specifying like, okay, so which time slot for the interview do you want? So I applied through the Washington D.C. So their embassy, the actual Japanese embassy, and there was a lot of applicants for it. I remember during my year when I applied, which is the year 2010, there was a lot of people who thought like, oh, well, you know, if you apply at the embassy, maybe it's better, or like, there was all sorts of different theories. It just turns out that, you know, I'm originally from Maryland, so the closest embassy / consulate was, in fact, the embassy in Washington, D.C. Nonetheless, there was a lot of applicants through there. So I remember that I initially found out that I got accepted through a PDF file. Basically, they had uploaded a PDF file on their website, and it was just like no rows and rows of numbers. I remember doing the Control F, right, find, and like typing in my my number, my user number or whatever, and seeing it light up. That was pretty amazing. So nonetheless, I regressed. So I got an email stating, okay, when do you want to have the interview? My interview was actually like the second week of February. They had the whole week set out, and it was basically a first come, first served type of deal. They had about 3 or 4 slots per hour. So nonetheless, I got it, and I went for the second week of February. Because Washington, D.C., and you know how crowded it could be, I was worried about traffic. I know some people that they actually like ran the course. What I mean by that is like wherever they got accepted for their consulate, they actually physically drove there during the time that they would have to go for the interview, kind of as a warm-up, to basically see where to park, where the consulate is, etc. I didn't really go that far. Because luckily I got my brother to drive me, so I didn't have to worry about parking or anything. I remember going and driving down. It took about an hour and a half from where I lived to the embassy, and oh man, I was feeling really nervous, you know, because you read all different stuff online. People say like as soon as you walk in you're judged. And then there's some other people who are like, okay, well, talk to other people as soon as you get in so it looks like you're more approachable, more friendly, because obviously these are all qualities that they're after, right? They're after someone who's an outgoing personality, very cheerful, and yet professional, right? Because they want you to bring the excitement to the classroom and become independent, but of course they also want you to be a people person, or, you know, a social butterfly, like they call it. Nonetheless, I remember it was right around lunchtime, actually. I want to say maybe 12:30ish, 1 p.m. was my interview slot, and we decided to go get some lunch before. So I went to this nearby McDonald's, and it was actually the first time, a random part of my story, but nonetheless, we go to the McDonald's, and the bathroom was locked, and like there was a I don't even know what you want to call it, but to use the bathroom, you actually have to put money in it for the door to open. It's a very, very strange concept. I don't even know if it was legal or not, but nonetheless, luckily I didn't have to go. So I remember I ordered myself some like chicken nuggets and french fries, whatever. Couldn't eat at all because I was just super nervous, and then all of a sudden it dawned on me, I was like, shit, well, you know, I want to have good breath. You know, it's just the small things that'll get to you. So eventually I threw out like 80% of my food. My brother dropped me off in front of the Japanese embassy, and I have to say, you know, as soon as you step out, you see this huge embassy, big gates, like a security guy. I mean, it starts to hit you. So I went in, and as soon as I got in, there was actually a metal detector. I don't think there's metal detectors at consulates, but I guess obviously since it's the embassy, you know, it was my first time officially entering Japan, because as you know, obviously embassies and consulates are sovereign places. So as soon as you enter them, you're kind of in that country, so to speak. So, you know, I went to Japan in Washington, D.C. So I went through the metal detector, and they had this big hall set up. Lots of rows of chairs. They had a TV in the middle of the room, and the TV was basically showing footage from previous ALTs, or assistant language teachers, who went to Japan. Some Cs, SEA. They're basically the people who come to Japan. They're like sports professionals, and they teach sports. Very few of them on the JET program, but nonetheless there are some. And then they had some interviews with the third type, the CIRs, which are effectively the people who come here and they're primarily working as like a translator or interpreter, stuff like that. Nonetheless, they had this TV rolling on like the same, you know, footage going over and over. And they had like a table set up in the corner where they had some few staff if you wanted to ask any questions, etc. And like a sign-in sheet, of course. So I signed in my sheet, they give me some pamphlets, and they asked me like, okay, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. I didn't really have any questions, so I just sat down. And as soon as you sat down, there was basically two different types of applicants that I saw. There was the applicants, right, who came there, and they were like super quiet. They were just sitting on their chair, just kind of zoning out, or being super nervous. I saw some people looking at flashcards. Yeah, like I'm sure they wrote their questions and answers. That I would not recommend bringing. I mean, it's not like a test. Then you had the other ones who were trying to be like over Genki, over energetic, talking to the staff, because the staff were effectively previous people who went on the JET program, came back. So you had all these people like asking about their experience, like, oh, where'd you go, and how was life in Japan? Because obviously, you know, going to Japan, super excited, etc. I think I asked one person basically how their experience was, and if I remember correctly, they said something like they went to Hiroshima, they stayed there for a year, it was a great life experience, etc., etc. But at that time, really, I mean, I'm just super nervous, you know, I'm thinking about the interview, but at the same time, I'm trying to, you know, cool down, or rather, I don't know, relax by just simply talking to this person. Nonetheless, I probably waited about 20 minutes, and these staffers, they keep coming in and calling our numbers. So eventually they came in, they called my number, and I went up, and she told me to go upstairs, because it was like a 2-floor, I mean, I'm sure it has more than 2 floors, the embassy, but nonetheless, they told me to go to the 2nd floor, and they told me a room number. I don't remember the room number, but for the sake, let's say it's like 103. Sounds pretty good. So I'm going up the stairs, and it's like a spiral staircase. You know, heart's pounding. I'm full of excitement, fear. You know, you call it, you know, whatever. I opened the door, and it was like a double door, which is kind of weird. I opened the door. I walked a little bit, and I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was in the corner there was basically 3 desks lined up, and there were 3 people there. And then in the middle of the room there was 1 chair, and that was where I was gonna sit. So I come in and I say, you know, good afternoon, and they say, oh, you know, please take a seat, whatever. So I sit down, and that's when the interview process begins. So all in all, it was about 20 minutes long. At first they asked me, you know, what's your name? And I said, you know, what my name was. They asked me basic information at the beginning, like what was on the application. Where are you from, what you major in, what you like, what you dislike. And then after a little bit, like, you know, warm up, I guess, then they go right into it. And they start asking you questions. Like one of the questions I got was, okay, so if there's a student and is being rowdy in class, not focusing, not paying attention, how would you handle that? So that's one thing to keep in mind. They're definitely going to ask you questions to try and, throw you off or try and get you, rile you up perhaps. In this case, I went with the default, which is, I think, a pretty good answer. So as an ALT, effectively on the JET program, you're an assistant language teacher. So you're not a full teacher, right? You're always going to be teaching with the Japanese teacher of English. Now, there are some rare cases that either they're absent, sick, don't show up to class. I've had a few of those, and you're just kind of stuck to do the class by yourself, but it's very rare. In the 6 years I've been here, for a teacher to not show up or to be sick and like they kind of say, can you do it? It probably happened less than 5 times. So 5 times in 6 years isn't a whole lot. And basically, in the case of discipline, we're not in charge to discipline the students. So I basically said that I would talk about it with the Japanese teacher of English after class, because here in Japan, the teachers aren't just teachers. Like, they know all about the students' lives. They know which parents just recently got a divorce. They know if there's a death in the family. They know all this information because the communication between the parents and the teachers is really rock solid here. I'll give you an example. If a student doesn't come to school, the teachers are panicking. They're calling their home many times until they pick up. If they don't pick up, then they'll call like the parent's cell phone. And sometimes I've heard like the parents will pick up and they're like, oh yeah, like so the teacher's saying this, of course. So the student like hasn't come to school yet, and the parent's like, oh well, they left. And then the teacher apologizes, like, oh, I'm sorry, like I'll keep looking and I'll notify you. It's like all of a sudden the responsibility of the student completely falls on the teacher, not the parent themselves. There's cases where the parent's like, oh, like my kid doesn't feel like going to school today, and the teachers are the one like saying, no, you gotta come, type of deal. So it's really interesting about that. But nonetheless, going back to the question, I don't want to go off topic too much. The best answer is you want to converge, or you want to talk to the Japanese teacher of English after class, because that person might have a death in the family. It's possible that they're having problems at home, or they had a big sports meet. That's another thing teachers are very lax about. Like if a student participated in like a tournament, a sports tournament, the previous day, etc., usually the next day they're tired, so the teachers kind of give them a free pass. Some of them, that sometimes they might like do like a half, like, oh, you have to wake up, if they're sleeping, or if they're being rowdy, they're like, oh, you have to focus. But most of the time it's pretty much of a hands-off, unless they're really disrupting the class. Then the teacher might stop them. But by and large, the correct answer you want to say is that you will talk about it with the Japanese teacher of English, because they know best, they know the situation of the student better, and then you will act accordingly from there. Usually they'll get pretty excited with this answer, because that's basically what they want. They obviously don't want to hear that you're going to like smack around the student, get them to focus or to wake them up, etc. Some of the questions I was asked is, why Japan? This is obviously something you might have talked about in your statement of purpose when you applied to the JET program, but it is something that they will probably ask you at the interview process. Obviously, why Japan? They don't want to hear that, oh, I love anime, I love Japanese cartoons, like I want to go to the motherland, beam me up, Scotty, right? No. They don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is what you can do for them. That's got to be the theme that's going to be running in your head the whole time. Any questions, don't talk about how the benefits are going to be for you. They don't care. They don't want to hear about that, right? They're not paying you to come on a vacation to Japan. They're paying you to come and teach the student about American or European or whatever country you're coming from, their culture, etc. So if they say, why Japan? In my case, I had a really nice story, and it was actually true. I told them, back in high school, I watched this one Japanese movie, and I got really interested in kendo. So I started doing that. Kendo, by the way, is Japanese fencing. And then I said, in college, for my major was business administration with a concentration in international business. I had to study a foreign language. So I chose Japanese. I got more and more interested in learning about Japan's culture. And that really motivated me to want to come to Japan to, share American culture with the students, and et cetera, et cetera. And they like that, okay? They like those kind of explanations. Effectively, not so much. They don't want to hear that, oh, well, I want to come, get some work experience for a year and go back home. That's not necessarily what they want to hear. So the theme always got to be, you want to teach the students about your culture, you want to share your culture with the students, all that good stuff is something you can say. Okay. Something else that they asked from me is, so something also to keep in mind, of course, is a lot of the questions they ask you, they could be pulling it from your statement of purpose. For example, in my case, I said that when I was in college, I was the president of the chess club, and that I'm really looking forward to bringing chess to Japan, etc. Because, in Japan, there are some chess players, of course, but by and large, the most popular form is shogi, which is Japanese chess, which is very vastly different than normal. And one of the unique questions they asked me was, okay, well, how would you bring chess into the classroom? Like, how could you, basically make a lesson, an English lesson surrounded by chess? And that kind of threw me off for a second, but I just started to roll with it. And I said, well, with chess, there are a lot of squares on the board, and there's numbers and letters. For example, on the sides, right, you have the different numbers, and then at the bottom you have the alphabets, and there's positions, right? The pieces have different names. So then I said, what I would do is I would set it up where I would ask the students a question in English, they would answer it, and then I would get them to move the piece while also saying what pieces they move. For example, they would be like queen, b4, 2, b5, right? And that would go back and forth. I would also get them to write it, the annotations of it, and make that a lesson. And they thought it was a pretty unique and pretty cool idea, which actually, sure enough, after 5 years of being here in Japan, I was actually able to do a chess lesson, which was pretty cool. But I'll talk about that in another video. So once again, definitely know your statement of purpose. They're going to draw a bunch of questions from there. They will try and rattle you. They'll ask you about culture shock. They'll say, do you have any fears, or are you worried about going abroad, etc. Because they're trying to vet you, right? Every year there are always a few jets who they make it through the process, right? They come to Japan and then they freak out and say, oh, Japan's not for me, and then they fly back home, right? They don't want that to happen, because if that does happen, they're out of plane ticket, right? And because they're paying for you to come to Japan, of course. Now there are recent changes that I believe that if you actually go back within the first month, you're obligated to pay back the ticket. But how are they gonna reinforce that? How are they gonna force that? I don't know. Nonetheless, they want to make sure you don't come to Japan and freak out. Now, in my case, in my application, I wrote down that I can speak Japanese at like an intermediate level. I mean, I did take 2 years of Japanese classes at university. So once again, there was a 3-person panel, right? They had one was a previous jet. They had another one who was like, I don't even know, like a person in charge of their jet office or whatever locally. And then the third individual was an actual like Japanese woman who was an employee at the embassy. So, they each asked me different questions. The Japanese person, she actually straight up started speaking to me in Japanese, and she said, well, I noticed that, she said this first part in English, of course, but she said, I noticed that you said that you can speak Japanese. And I said, yeah. And she said, okay, well, can you do a simple, like a Japanese self-introduction? And I said, sure. So then I said, my name, where I'm from, what I like, what I don't like, my age, and thank you very much. Effectively, what I memorized for my oral exam for university, for my final exam. And she thanked me, and that was that for that question. And then they keep on asking me other things like, what was the other questions? Like, what age do you want to teach? It's like, what kind of students do you want to teach? Now, obviously, in the application process, you do have a section where you can talk about usually what grade level you want to teach at, or I believe there was when I applied. But nonetheless, I shot for the middle ground. I said, I don't mind teaching, little kids or elementary school students, but I also see the benefit of teaching at the high school level, because you can, do harder material. You can plan more extensive, complicated lessons, etc. And I gave this big spiel about it. But truth be told, I really did want high school. But in the end, I did not get high school, which was a blessing and not so much a blessing. But nonetheless, that's another story. So they asked me what I want, what my preferences. Like I said, they asked me some questions. Once again, if you don't know the answer to one of their questions, just state something else. I know it might sound like bad advice, but it's much better to remain calm and collective. If they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, you could say I don't know the answer. You could kind of steer it in a different direction, but I wouldn't just make up an answer completely. It could be pretty obvious if you did, but nonetheless, what they're really looking at for these answers are not so much what you're saying, but rather how you say it. Do you remain calm, collective? Are you Genki? Smiling a lot helps. Make sure you're smiling. Make sure you're looking at each of the three interviewers. You might not have three, you might have less, you might have more, but nonetheless, make sure you're doing proper eye contact, big voice, right? You're going to be, when you come to Japan, you're going to be teaching in a classroom, and the students are going to always be super silent, so they're going to want to see that you got a nice big voice. They're going to see how you react under pressure, etc. And, how excited are you to go? They don't want to see that you have this level of desperation, but at the same time, they want to know that you really want it. Okay, and that's the most important thing. So then I remember, leaving the interview after about 20 minutes and thinking, God, I messed that up so much. I remember keep rattling my brain, thinking that, oh, I should have said this, oh, I should have said that. You can always second guess yourself, but in the end, I did get shortlisted, so I guess they must have liked what they heard. So try not to sweat too much about it. If you go online, there are a lot of questions that people have been asked, and they have rows and rows of it, and you can practice until you're blue in the face. But I would suggest not doing it so much. Myself, I didn't actually practice any questions. I thought that to be as genuine as possible, I can't memorize answers and stuff like that. The only thing I did was read over my statement of purpose a few times, so I know what I wrote in case they asked me something, which they did. But you just want to remain relaxed, so that's important, and wear a suit. Oh my God, I can't believe that some people, they pass the application process, they're at the interview, and I kid you not, there's some people with slacks or a sweater and not in a suit. Okay, if anyone knows anything about Japan, it's that professionalism is very important. Okay, you'll see businessmen here on bicycles and wearing suits. Now once you get here and you start working, look at this. You don't need a suit to go to work unless you work at a high school or they specify it. Most places don't. But nonetheless, for an interview, please dress up. You know, I had a lot of different suits, but I didn't have any that actually just fit me. So for the process, for the interview, I went out and I bought myself a suit. Now you might be wondering, well, you know, suits are expensive, you know, be a few $100, but think of it as an investment, because even if you don't get accepted to the JET program, which I hope you will, but even if you don't, that suit you can still use for other jobs. It's not like a one-time deal. So I think every man, woman, you need to have a suit, a nice, comfortable, fitting suit. Just look professional, right? You gotta look the part. So I think that's gonna wrap up my my interview experience / advice. Once again, congratulations for everyone who made it to interview process. If you didn't make the interview process this year, you know, I hope you try again next year, and I hope you make it. If you have any questions about this video or any of my other videos, feel free to comment down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Alright guys, thanks again for watching. Bye.